remember there are two types of cells in the nervous system. Neurons, which we just covered, and the second is neuroglia. Now, scientists ignored neuroglia for the longest time because neurons were the main cell that actually did the communication. But it turns out the neuroglia are really important. They're the support neurons, so they help support the neuroglia. So for example, in this image, you can see in the background here, all of this is the neuron, all in this gray color. And then surrounding that neuron, you can see here in white, down here, up here, all of these are neuroglia. So they're going to help support the neuron and allow it to function. Now it turns out that neuroglia became really critical and of interest to people because we started studying brain tumors. So think about a tumor. A tumor, you might recall, is when mitosis goes out of control, where cells divide and divide and divide. And hence you get the growth of cells, which is the tumor. Now, have any of you guys ever heard of the rumor that neurons don't divide? In other words, you can't have new neurons? Now think about it. Is that true or is that false? For the most part, that's actually true. You'll have all the neurons you're going to have when you're born. Neurons, the standard neuron cannot go through mitosis, so you can't replace it. So if you lose your neurons, they're gone. There are a few exceptions that we will cover later. So now go back to the concept of a brain tumor. If a brain tumor is cells going through mitosis out of control and neurons can't go through mitosis for the most part, can neurons cause the brain tumor? No. It turns out that when you get a brain tumor, the cells that go through mitosis out of control are these neuroglia. So the neuroglia are the ones that go through mitosis, and they're the ones that cause the brain tumor. So this led scientists to start to study the neuroglia more. So let's take a look and see what types of neuroglia you have. So we're going to classify some of the main neuroglias, and we'll start off with the neuroglia that you find in the central nervous system, so in the brain and the spinal cord. One type of neuroglia is called an astrocyte, and the astrocyte is important for keeping the blood-brain barrier, or the BBB. This means that it helps regulate what goes from the blood and into the brain and vice versa. So that way you make sure that nothing toxic gets into the brain. So it keeps a clean environment inside your central nervous system. So here you have an astrocyte. It comes from the word astro, which means kind of like a star. So you can kind of see that the projections go out in all directions like a star. Next, you have microglial cells, and these phagocytize waste and pathogens. In other words, they eat or engulf waste and pathogen. So here, you have a microglial cell in contact with here, the cells in yellow are the neuron. Ependymal cells, we'll see this later on, they help circulate cerebral spinal fluid. So I'll explain later what cerebral spinal fluid is, but basically it flows throughout your spinal cord inside and outside of your brain. And these ependymal cells will line the boundaries where the CSF fluid here is in blue. And then notice these little hair-like structures. These actually wave, they kind of like brush the CSF in one direction. Oligodendrites. Oligodendrites do something called myelination. Myelination is a fatty covering that goes around the axon. It's like the protection around a wire. So for example, you'd never see just a bare wire. Instead, you'll see all of the wires, for instance, for your computer, for your cord, they're all wrapped in like a black or white rubber protective coating. That's somewhat like the myelination. It's a fatty protective coating around the axon. So here you can see in yellow, that's the axon, and all of this white-blue is the myelination. So it helps protect and allow for that electrical signal, the action potential, to travel fast and efficient through the axon. Now, in the peripheral nervous system, you have different types of neuroglia. So, for example, you have satellite cells. Satellite cells regulate exchange with the neuron and its surrounding environment. So, for example, this would be the neuron cell body, and then in this dark gray color around it, this is the satellite cell. So it literally covers or wraps around the neuron cell body, therefore helping to regulate what goes in and out of the neuron. And then you have the Schwann cell. Schwann cells behave exactly the same as the oligodendrites, except for they do the myelination for cells in the peripheral nervous system, or neurons in the peripheral nervous system. So here you have the neuron in yellow. You can see the satellite cell in purple surrounding the neuron cell body. And then in blue, you have the myelination that's done by the Schwann cells. So here you can actually see the Schwann cell would be right around the neuron's axon, and it produces the myelination which wraps around the axon. In summary, you interact with your world by using your peripheral and central nervous system. The nervous system consists of two types of cells, neurons and neuroglia, which are further classified. And finally, neurons communicate by sending impulse through dendrites, cell body, and an axon.